Hey everyone, welcome to this section. In this section, we'll discuss regarding the next topic of your Palo Alto VPN, which is your Remote Access VPN. So first of all, let's understand the overview of Remote Access VPN with respect to Palo Alto firewalls, and then we'll go ahead and implement the Remote Access VPN solution that is called as Global Protect with your Palo Alto environment. So first of all, Remote Access VPN, as you can see over here, so I will be having a remote user who will be a road warrior, or might be he is a traveler, or might be a user working from home. He's a corp managed user. Right now, whenever he is considered as remote, that means he is away from the office network, but whenever he is at his home network or at a remote network, from there, if he wants to access any sort of corp resources, let's say this particular resources on 10.1.1.0/24 subnet, that means this user should have to have some sort of solution like Remote Access VPN, which it can establish from itself to the company's edge device, which is normally a firewall. Right, so it will establish a Remote Access VPN from itself using either a clientless solution or a client-based solution. So we'll be installing one agent on this particular device, which is called as a Global Protect. We normally say GP, that is Global Protect. Agent will be installed here, which will formulate a Remote Access VPN session with the edge firewall. And once the firewall authenticates this particular user, then based on the security policy, it will be authorized to access the right resources or the right authorized resources. Right, so that's the whole idea, the whole intention of doing this particular lab. So before that, let's go ahead and note down some key points regarding Remote Access VPNs, and then we will configure the same with this environment. All right, so I have a user which is sitting outside. His IP is on the public network. You can see here 123.1.188/24, and I'll consider PFW1 as my edge firewall, which should be the firewall gateway for this remote user, and this is my interesting subnet 10.1.1.0 acting as a corp resource which the remote user wants to access. Okay, so yeah, we'll discuss regarding the implementation, but let's first jot down some key points regarding Remote Access VPN, which is also called as Global Protect with respect to Palo Alto, and I can say some key points here. Okay, so first of all, as you know that a Palo Alto Remote Access VPN, it will allow users like employees that is working from home or might be traveling to securely connect to their organization's internal network over the public internet, and this is the major intention, right? So a Remote Access VPN using Palo Alto Network Firewall, it will provide secure communication. It provides encrypted communication between the remote user and the corporate network, and it uses the agent called as Global Protect, which is the Palo Alto's VPN solution. Right, so what are the key components that we have? We can actually note down the key components. The first one that you have is called as the Global Protect client. So it's a software which is installed on user devices. So I can say the software installed on user devices, which could be on multiple platforms, could be Windows, could be Mac OS, could be Linux, or could be mobile as well. Okay, the generic idea is to establish a VPN tunnel. Okay, step number 2 or key component number 2 is the Palo Alto firewall itself. Right, so the Palo Alto firewall, it's going to act as a VPN gateway for that remote user. Okay, whose job is to terminate the VPN connection or the VPN session, and it will enforce the security policies, right, with respect to authentication for that remote user who is trying to access, right, verify if it is authenticated user or not, then write down the authorization policy. So basically check for which are the network resources that it is allowed to access. Okay, step number 3 is of course authentication, as I was mentioning. So authentication, the idea is to integrate with any sort of third-party authentication provider. So with Palo Alto, when the user will go ahead and authenticate to Palo Alto over here, so when the user says, hey, I want to get access to the corporate resource, so once the user is going to provide its authentication credentials, to prove the user authentication credentials, a Palo Alto might onboard some sort of external identity providers, right? We call that as IDP, right? Or it can go ahead and be itself as authentication database. I mean, you can have the authentication database configured locally itself. So it can be like configured with a local DB authentication, or with an external IDP you can go with radius based authentication, or might be LDAP based authentication, etc. right? So it's a mechanism by which the Palo Alto firewall can authenticate the user. You need to define that. So that's what I was trying to explain here, is the authentication part. So usually you'll find it is integrated with AD. So integrated with directory services like AD, that is Active Directory, or LDAP, right, having multi-factor authentication enabled. Okay, in our case we'll be using the local DB authentication for making it simple. Yep. And last but not the least is the component called as encryption. So whatever data that remote user will send to the corp network, make sure that all the data is over that secure tunnel, secure VPN. So data should be encrypted using IPsec or SSL or TLS protocols. So data must be encrypted using IPsec or SSL/TLS protocols to protect information in transit. All right, so the process, the way it works, as simple as I've told you, the user will launch this particular client called as a Global Protect client, which is installed in this particular user. So the remote user will open that particular Global Protect application, and it will enter the credentials. And when the credentials are entered, it will be sent to that particular gateway, which is the PA firewall over here, for authentication. So the client will communicate with this particular Palo Alto firewall for authentication. The firewall will authenticate the user against a configured authentication profile here, and then the tunnel will be established from that particular firewall to that remote user. So once authenticated, an IPsec or SSL VPN tunnel is created between the client and the firewall. Then the secure access will be granted. So once the tunnel is established and the secure access will be granted via the firewall, the user will get an internal IP address. So you will see in the configuration step, the user will get an internal IP address from the firewall, right? Assuming that as if this user is sitting on that inside zone itself. So the user will get an internal IP address and can access the internal resources, like might be file servers, might be some intranet applications, etc., as if it is sitting in the office itself. And likewise, the final step is the security policy will be applied. So the Palo Alto firewall will go and apply the predefined security policy to the control what resources the user can access and inspect the traffic for various threats. Okay, so there are a lot of benefits that you get. One of the benefit is secure communication. That means your data will be protected from any sort of eavesdropping over the public internet, right? Whatever data you are sending, it will be protected against any sort of eavesdropping. The firewall is going to provide the access control. That means only authorized users or devices can connect. The firewall can provide threat prevention, so it is going to integrate with Palo Alto security services to block any malware or phishing services, etc. And it's very scalable, so it supports thousands of users depending on the firewall model, right? So many users like that, it can go ahead and get the services of the remote access VPN through those particular firewall. And again, it depends upon the number of remote access VPN sessions that it can establish, right, based on the hardware it has or based on the model number. All right, I hope it is clear so far. I will be discussing the implementation concept in the next video. Okay, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next lecture.